August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. Hiroshima, Japan. The morning is clear, too clear. Cicadas buzz in the trees along the Oda River. Streetcars rattle across bridges. Schoolchildren march in lines, sleeves rolled up, ready for another day of firebreak clearing. Above them, the sky is a perfect summer blue. At 31,000 feet, the B-29 superfortress Enola Gay glides silently. No evasive maneuvers, no flak bursts, no fighter escorts, just the low, steady hum of four Wright Cyclone engines and the weight of a single object hanging in the bomb bay. Colonel Paul Tibbets checks his watch. Below, Hiroshima doesn't know it has already been chosen. At exactly 8:15 a.m. the bomb drops. For 43 seconds, nothing happens. Then the sun falls. A white flash, brighter than anything human eyes were ever meant to see, engulfs the city. Shadows burn into stone. Skin peels from bone in an instant. A fireball expands outward at thousands of degrees, flattening buildings, vaporizing bodies, turning streets into rivers of flame. You don't hear the explosion. Not at first. The shockwave arrives after the light, a wall of pressure that crushes lungs, snaps trees like matchsticks, and hurls human beings through the air like leaves. In less than a minute, Hiroshima ceases to exist as a functioning city. From the air, the American crew watches a massive mushroom cloud rise, boiling, twisting, alive. It punches through the sky, climbing higher and higher until it towers over the earth like something unnatural, something final. Someone on board whispers, "My God." On the ground there is no God, only heat, fire, screaming. And yet this is the part history often skips. Japan does not surrender. Not that day. Not the next. Not even when the world realizes what has just been unleashed. In Tokyo, nearly 700 miles away, the first reports are confused. Phone lines to Hiroshima are dead. Telegraph lines are silent. Reconnaissance planes sent to investigate return with words that barely make sense. A city wiped out. Nothing left but smoke. Unprecedented destruction. At the Imperial General Headquarters, Army officers exchange grim looks. This is not the first time a Japanese city has burned. Tokyo itself was turned into a firestorm in March. 66 other cities have been bombed. Hundreds of thousands are already dead. One more ruined city, no matter how terrible, does not automatically mean surrender. By the afternoon, scientists from the Riken Institute begin to suspect the truth. Radiation burns, unusual injuries, a single bomb causing total annihilation. An atomic bomb. Still, the reaction is not panic, it is calculation. General Anami Korchika, the powerful minister of war, listens in silence. His jaw tightens. Around him, senior officers, many hardened by years of total war, do not speak of defeat. They speak of endurance. If the Americans have one such bomb, they reason, perhaps even two, can they really have many? And even if they do, what then? You have to understand the mindset inside Japan in August 1945. The nation is starving, the Navy is shattered, the Air Force barely exists, but surrender, unconditional surrender, is something else entirely. It is not just military defeat, it is spiritual annihilation. To surrender means accepting foreign occupation. It means the possible execution of leaders. It means the end of the emperor, not just a ruler but a living god. For men like Anami, surrender is worse than death. That night, as fires still burn in Hiroshima, the Supreme Council for the direction of the war meets. 6 men, deadlocked. 3 favor seeking peace on conditions. 3 insist on fighting on. The atomic bomb is discussed briefly. It is a new weapon, one officer admits, but not decisive. The meeting ends without a decision. Outside, the war continues. In Hiroshima, Survivors wander through a landscape that no longer looks like Earth. Charred figures stumble past piles of ash that were once families. Rivers are clogged with bodies. The wounded beg for water, unaware that drinking will soon kill them. A young doctor, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, writes in his diary that the city looks as if it had been pulverized by a gigantic hammer. Yet no surrender order comes. The emperor is informed, carefully, indirectly. Even he does not yet grasp the full meaning of what has happened. And the Americans, watching from across the Pacific, wait. They believe the message has been sent. They believe Hiroshima has changed everything. But inside Japan's leadership, another belief is taking hold, one far more dangerous. If the enemy has revealed their ultimate weapon, then perhaps this is their last card. And if Japan can endure just a little longer, if it can bleed the Americans during an invasion, force massive casualties, bring the Soviet Union in as a mediator, then maybe surrender can be avoided. Or at least reshaped. As the smoke from Hiroshima drifts into the upper atmosphere, Japan's leaders prepare not to quit, but to gamble everything. They do not yet know that another sun is already being prepared. August 7, 1945, Tokyo, 2:30 a.m. The room smells of cigarette smoke and exhaustion. Maps cover the walls of the underground bunker beneath the Imperial Palace, maps that no longer match reality. Red pins mark American advances that have already happened. Blue lines outline defensive plans that exist mostly on paper. Around the table, Japan's highest leaders sit rigid, uniforms pressed, faces unreadable. No one mentions Hiroshima directly at first. Instead, they discuss shipping losses, fuel shortages, the coming famine, routine matters of a nation on the brink. This is how denial works, not loud, not dramatic, but methodical. General Anami Korchika breaks the silence. He acknowledges the destruction of Hiroshima, but frames it as an extension of what Japan has already endured. Tokyo burned, he reminds them. Osaka burned, Nagoya burned. He pauses. And we are still here. To Anami and the hardliners, the atomic bomb is not a revolution. It is a refinement. Terrible, yes, but not fundamentally different from the firebombing that has already killed more Japanese civilians than Hiroshima ever will. What matters is not destruction. What matters is will. Across the city, scientists rush to analyze soil samples and medical reports smuggled out of Hiroshima. Their conclusion is grim and unmistakable. This was nuclear fission, radiation, a weapon unlike any other. They submit their findings to the government. The reaction? Silence. Because the science, while horrifying, does not solve Japan's real dilemma. Even now, Japan still has over 2 million soldiers stationed across the home islands. Hundreds of thousands more wait in China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. Civilians, men, women, and children are being armed with bamboo spears, obsolete rifles, and suicide charges. The plan is called Ketsugo. One decisive battle on the beaches of Kyushu. One bloodbath so horrific that the Americans will be forced to negotiate. Japan does not need to win. It only needs to make victory unbearable. And so the atomic bomb becomes, in the minds of the generals, a problem of numbers. How many bombs does America really have? The United States, for its part, makes no attempt to hide the answer. President Harry S. Truman issues a public warning. More destruction will follow, he says, if Japan does not surrender. Leaflets rain down over Japanese cities, promising devastation beyond imagination. But leaflets are easy to dismiss. Words can be doubted. And Japan's leadership has spent a decade teaching its people that death in service to the emperor is the highest honor imaginable. Surrender is not part of that language. Then on August 8th, the war changes again. At 11:00 p.m., Japanese Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo receives an urgent message from Moscow. The tone is formal, cold. The Soviet Union, Japan's last hope for mediation, has declared war. For months, Japan had clung to a fragile illusion that Stalin might broker peace between Tokyo and Washington, that Japan could avoid unconditional surrender by playing the great powers against one another. That illusion dies in a single sentence. Soviet armies surge across Manchuria, crushing the elite Kwantung Army in days. Japanese officers who had preached endurance now face a nightmare scenario: war on three fronts, with no path to negotiation left. And still, the cabinet does not surrender. Not yet. Inside the Supreme Council, the debate turns desperate. The peace faction argues that Japan is finished, that Hiroshima was not a warning, but a demonstration, that more atomic bombs will fall. The military faction counters with something chilling. "If we are to be destroyed," one officer says, "then let us be destroyed gloriously." They argue that even nuclear weapons cannot occupy Japan, that the Americans will still have to land, still have to bleed. And if enough Americans die, perhaps the terms will soften. Perhaps the emperor will be spared. Perhaps the myth of national honor can survive. This is not madness. It is calculation, filtered through ideology. On August 9th, as these arguments rage, a second American bomber approaches Japan. This time, the target is Kokura. Clouds obscure the city. The pilot circles once, twice, three times. Fuel is running low. He turns south. The backup target comes into view, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the second bomb falls. Another son is born. Another city vanishes. And in Tokyo, the impossible becomes undeniable. If Hiroshima was a warning, Nagasaki is proof. Proof that this weapon is not singular. Proof that America can keep going. The illusion of endurance begins to crack. But even now, even after 2 atomic bombs and a Soviet invasion, Japan's leaders remain split. The final decision will not come from generals. It will come from someone who has never spoken publicly about war before. And when he finally does, it will shatter centuries of tradition. August 9, 1945, near midnight, Imperial Palace, Tokyo. Rain taps softly against the stone above the underground shelter, as if the city itself is holding its breath. Inside the palace bunker, the air is heavy, thick with sweat, incense, and something unspoken. The 6 men of the Supreme Council sit once more around the table. Their faces are drawn, their voices low. For the first time since the war began, the meeting is not dominated by strategy. It is dominated by fear. Nagasaki has been destroyed. The Soviet Union is advancing relentlessly through Manchuria. Communications from entire Japanese armies have gone silent. Still, the council is deadlocked. 3 votes for surrender. 3 votes to fight on. The stalemate is complete. Under Japan's constitution, this means one thing: the decision must go to the emperor. And so, for the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito is asked to intervene directly in a matter of war. Hirohito enters quietly. No dramatic announcement, no raised voice. The men in the room rise instantly and bow, foreheads nearly touching the floor. For them, this is not just a man, it is a divine presence. The emperor listens. He hears the generals speak of honor, of sacrifice, of national spirit. Then he hears the civilians speak of annihilation, of a nation being erased. When it is his turn, Hirohito speaks softly, so softly that some later struggle to remember his exact words. But the meaning is unmistakable. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage, he says. He pauses. To continue would only result in the total extinction of the Japanese people. The room freezes. This is not a military argument. This is a moral one. For the first time, the emperor places the survival of his people above the traditions of death before surrender. He orders Japan to accept the Potsdam Declaration. Unconditional surrender. The decision that Hiroshima alone could not force has finally been made. But the war is not over yet. Outside the palace, many officers still do not know, and some, when they find out, refuse to accept it. That night, a group of young army officers launches a desperate coup attempt, the Kyujo incident. They seize parts of the palace grounds, searching for a single object, the recording of the emperor's surrender speech. If they can destroy it, the war can continue. Inside a soundproof room, technicians hurry to press the emperor's voice onto fragile lacquer discs. Hirohito speaks into a microphone, his voice high, formal, almost unrecognizable. Most Japanese have never heard him speak before. As the officers search the palace halls, guards stall them. Doors are locked, corridors become labyrinths. At dawn, the coup collapses. The recordings survive. August 15, 1945, noon. Radios crackle across Japan. Farmers stop in their fields. Factory workers freeze beside silent machines. Soldiers on distant islands huddle around battered receivers. Then they hear it. A calm, distant voice speaking in archaic Japanese. The emperor announces that the war has ended. He does not mention defeat. He does not mention surrender. He speaks instead of enduring the unendurable. For many, the words are confusing. Some weep, some stare into space, some refuse to believe it at all. But it is over. Hiroshima did not end the war because Japan's leaders were not yet ready to accept a future without victory, or honor as they understood it. It took 2 atomic bombs, a Soviet invasion, and finally the intervention of a silent god emperor to force a choice between extinction and survival. Only then did Japan surrender. Not because it was destroyed, but because it finally understood that nothing would be left. And as the ashes of Hiroshima and Nagasaki settle, the world enters an age where a single decision, made in seconds, can end civilizations. An age that has never truly ended. September 2, 1945, Tokyo Bay, aboard the USS Missouri. The steel deck is slick with morning dew. American sailors stand at attention, white uniforms blinding in the sun. Cameras click. Flags snap in the wind. Below them, the harbor is crowded with warships, silent witnesses to the end of the most destructive conflict in human history. At 9:08 a.m., a small group of Japanese officials steps forward. They bow. Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, walking with a cane, his leg lost to an earlier assassination attempt, signs first. Behind him, General Yashijiro Umezu, once a fierce opponent of surrender, lowers his pen with visible hesitation. The war is officially over. But the question that will haunt historians for generations is already forming. If Hiroshima didn't force Japan to surrender, what actually did? In the weeks that follow, American occupation forces enter Japan expecting fanatic resistance. They find something else entirely. Cities in ruins, children malnourished, soldiers obediently stacking rifles, civilians bowing silently as foreign troops march through streets that had once been declared sacred ground. There is no uprising, no last stand. The national will that had resisted even atomic destruction has evaporated. Because surrender was never just about bombs. It was about legitimacy. Inside Japan, a quiet transformation begins. The emperor, once divine, renounces his godhood. The words feel unreal when spoken aloud, a god admitting humanity. For many Japanese, this is more shattering than Hiroshima itself. The war had been endured because it was sacred, because it was inevitable, because it was commanded by something beyond question. Once that illusion breaks, resistance collapses overnight. And suddenly, people begin to ask what they were never allowed to ask before. Why did we fight on when defeat was certain? Why were cities sacrificed one by one? Why did Hiroshima happen at all? Survivors of the atomic bombings, the hibakusha, return to what remains of their homes. They carry burns that never heal, illnesses doctors cannot yet name, children born years later with deformities no one understands. At first they are shunned. Radiation is invisible, feared, misunderstood. Hiroshima becomes a place people avoid, not just for its destruction, but for what it represents. A future where war is no longer measured in victories, but in extinction. In the United States, the narrative hardens quickly. The bomb ended the war. The bomb saved lives. The bomb was necessary. Few question it, at least not yet. Because to question it is to imagine alternatives, an invasion of Japan, millions dead, a war without end. And so Hiroshima becomes a justification, not a warning. But in Japan, memory works differently. Hiroshima is not remembered as the moment of surrender. It is remembered as the moment humanity crossed a line. And this is the final truth, one that often goes unspoken. Japan did not surrender because one city vanished. It surrendered because the idea of Japan itself was about to vanish. The atomic bomb did not break Japan's armies. It did not even immediately break its leadership. What it broke slowly, brutally, was the future. A future where cities could be erased without warning. Where emperors could not protect their people. Where endurance no longer meant survival. When that reality became undeniable, surrender followed. Today, the world still lives in Hiroshima's shadow. Nations possess arsenals capable of ending civilization in minutes. Leaders still speak of deterrence, of necessity, of strength. But every time those weapons are discussed, one question lingers unanswered. If a single bomb could not force surrender, what happens when there are hundreds? And would humanity, like Japan in 1945, realize the truth only when there is almost nothing left to save? December 1945, Hiroshima, winter. Snow falls on a city that still has no shape. It settles on twisted steel beams, on cracked concrete, on fields where houses once stood. Smoke no longer rises, but the silence is heavier than any explosion. You can walk for blocks without hearing a single human voice. The war is over. But Hiroshima is not at peace. Doctors begin to notice something unsettling. People who survived the blast, who walked away seemingly unharmed, are getting sick. Hair falls out in clumps, gums bleed, fevers spike without warning, healthy men collapse in the streets. No one has a name for it yet. Radiation sickness. The bomb did not stop killing when the fireball faded. It simply learned patience. Across Japan, former soldiers try to return to ordinary life. Men trained to die now have to live. Some cannot sleep without hearing aircraft. Others bow instinctively when they hear boots behind them. And slowly, quietly, a forbidden thought spreads. What if surrender had come earlier? It is not spoken aloud, not yet, but it lingers in kitchens and train stations, in ruined schools and blacked-out hospitals. Hiroshima becomes the physical proof of that question. Not why the war ended, but why it was allowed to continue. In Tokyo, American occupation authorities study Japan carefully. They expected fanaticism. Instead, they find compliance, almost relief. General Douglas MacArthur understands something critical. Japan was not conquered by force alone. It was psychologically unmade. The emperor remains on the throne not as a god but as a symbol. Without him, the nation might fracture. With him, it can be reshaped. A new constitution is written, war is renounced, the military is dissolved. The very ideas that once made surrender impossible are dismantled piece by piece. And Hiroshima becomes the unspoken justification for all of it. But the bomb's meaning does not stay in Japan. In Washington, Moscow, London, leaders study photographs of the ruined city with clinical fascination. Blast radius, casualty estimates, yield calculations. Hiroshima is reduced to data. Because the real lesson many take from it is not moral. It is strategic. The bomb worked, but not how they expected. It did not instantly force surrender. It did not collapse command structures overnight. Instead, it changed the future. It made prolonged war impossible. And that realization sparks a new arms race, one built not on winning wars, but on preventing them through fear. Mutually assured destruction, a phrase that will define the next century. Back in Hiroshima, survivors gather each year at 8:15 a.m. They stand in silence, not to remember surrender, not to remember defeat, but to remember the moment the world discovered it could destroy itself. Children release paper lanterns into the river. Names are read aloud, many still unknown. The Peace Dome stands frozen in time, a skeleton that refuses to disappear. A reminder. And this is where the story truly ends. Hiroshima didn't make Japan surrender because surrender was never just about destruction. It was about identity, authority, belief. The bomb shattered all three, but not instantly. It took time for the truth to sink in. That no amount of courage can stop the sun from falling. That no nation is immortal. That endurance has limits. The world learned that lesson once. The question is whether it remembers it. August 6th, every year, 8:15 a.m. Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. The bell rings once. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to cut through the air. For a moment, the modern city rebuilt, alive, crowded, freezes in time. Traffic halts, conversations stop, heads bow, even children fall silent, sensing that this minute belongs to the dead. 80,000 people died here in seconds. But the war did not end that day. And that fact still unsettles the world. Historians argue in classrooms, politicians argue on stages, generals argue behind closed doors. Was Hiroshima necessary? Was Nagasaki? Would Japan have surrendered anyway? But those debates often miss the most uncomfortable truth of all. Hiroshima exposed how far human beings can go before they stop. Japan did not surrender because a city vanished. It surrendered when every remaining path, military, diplomatic, spiritual, collapsed at once. The bomb alone did not force peace. It stripped away the illusion that suffering could still buy honor. In the decades that followed, Japan rebuilt itself into something unrecognizable from its wartime past. Bullet trains replaced troop transports. Pacifism replaced militarism. Children learned a history once forbidden. Yet Hiroshima remained untouchable. Not as a symbol of Japanese victimhood, but as a warning written in concrete and bone. Because if Japan, a society trained to endure unimaginable loss, could hesitate even after the atomic bomb, then what does that say about the rest of us? Around the world, nuclear weapons multiplied. By the 1960s, enough existed to end civilization several times over. Generals spoke calmly about acceptable losses. Strategists spoke about first strikes. Politicians spoke about deterrence. All of them believed they understood Hiroshima. Few truly did. Because Hiroshima's lesson was never that the bomb ends wars. It was that once used, it changes what war means forever. Today, new generations stand where shadows were burned into stone. They take photographs. They listen to survivors whose voices grow fewer each year. They hear stories of a morning that began like any other and ended history as humanity knew it. And somewhere between the museum walls and the quiet river, a realization takes hold. Hiroshima didn't end a war. It began an era where surrender may come too late, where victory may be meaningless, where endurance may lead only to extinction. The people of 1945 learned that lesson the hard way. The rest of the world inherited it. And the final question Hiroshima leaves us is not about Japan. It is about us. If faced with the same choice, will we stop in time?